There's a mountain in Tibet that climbers don't talk about the way you'd expect. Not with excitement, not with pride, but with a kind of restraint. As if they're careful not to say too much. Because what surrounds this mountain isn't just difficulty, it's something harder to explain. Mount Kailash rises in near-perfect symmetry, standing alone in a way that feels almost intentional, almost constructed. And unlike every other major peak in the world, it has one distinction that immediately sets it apart. No one climbs it. Not because it can't be climbed, not because no one has tried, but because over time, something else took hold. Something strong enough to make even the most experienced climbers stop and turn back. And that's where the story begins, not with proof, not with science, but with a pattern. People who approach the mountain don't describe routes or weather windows. They describe how it feels to be near it. They talk about a strange shift, subtle at first, where time doesn't seem to move the way it should. Hours feel compressed or stretched, depending on who you ask. Some say a single day feels unusually long, like it's dragging behind you, while others say time disappears entirely, slipping past without warning. And then there are the accounts that don't get repeated often, but never fully disappear. The ones that claim your body begins to change faster than it should, that hair and nails appear to grow at an unnatural rate, that fatigue doesn't feel like altitude, but something deeper, something internal. Now, it would be easy to dismiss all of this immediately, to call it altitude sickness, or suggestion, or stories that grew over time. And many people do. But what keeps the story alive is not one dramatic claim, it's consistency. These accounts don't come from a single moment or a single group. They appear across decades, from people who arrived believing in the mountain and from people who didn't believe anything at all. And still, the same themes repeat. Something about this place interferes, not just with direction, but with perception itself. And that's where history begins to layer over experience. Because for over 1,000 years, this mountain has been considered sacred, not by one culture, but by several, all of them arriving at the same conclusion from completely different paths. In Hindu tradition, it is believed to be the home of Shiva, not symbolically, but literally. In Buddhism, it represents the center of the universe, the axis that everything else turns around. And in other traditions, it carries its own meaning, equally powerful, equally untouchable. Different beliefs, different origins, and yet they all agree on one thing. This is not a place meant to be conquered. And that's where the story shifts, because throughout human history, if something can be climbed, eventually someone will try. Mountains are conquered, records are broken, limits are pushed. That's what humans do. But this mountain doesn't follow that pattern. It stands in plain sight, visible, reachable, and still untouched. Not because it's hidden, but because over time, a different kind of agreement formed around it. One that doesn't rely on rules or enforcement, but on something far more durable: belief, reinforced by story, and sustained long enough that people stopped asking if they should climb it and started asking something else entirely. What is it about this mountain that made people stop trying? What makes this mountain different isn't just what people say about it. It's what people have refused to do, even when they had every reason to try. In the early 2000s, one of the most respected climbers in the world, Reinhold Messner, was offered the opportunity to attempt a climb of Mount Kailash. And this wasn't speculation or rumor. This was real, documented, a moment where modern exploration could have overridden centuries of belief. And yet, he declined. Not because he doubted his ability, not because of weather or risk, but because, in his own words, some places should be left alone. That decision carried weight, because Messner was not a spiritual man speaking from tradition. He was a climber who had spent his life confronting the most dangerous peaks on Earth. And still, he chose not to step onto this one. But that refusal didn't appear out of nowhere. It sits on top of something much older, something that predates modern climbing entirely. For over 1,000 years, people haven't climbed this mountain. They've walked around it. Thousands of pilgrims travel across harsh terrain to complete what's known as the Kora, a full circuit around the mountain that can take days at high altitude, through wind, cold, and exhaustion. And yet they don't do it for challenge. They do it for meaning. In some traditions, one full circuit is believed to cleanse a lifetime of sins. 10 circuits bring deeper purification, and 108 circuits are said to lead to enlightenment. And this is where the story begins to shift from physical to something more personal. Because along that path, there are accounts, not dramatic, not exaggerated, but consistent. Pilgrims who describe feeling time stretch during the journey, moments that seem to last longer than they should, hours that pass without being noticed, and an awareness that something feels different, even if they can't explain it. Some describe sudden fatigue that doesn't match their condition. Others describe bursts of energy that come and go without pattern. And then there are the quieter observations, the ones shared between locals, not written down, not studied, but passed on carefully. Stories of travelers who attempted to leave the path, to move closer to the mountain itself, and felt an immediate resistance, not physical, not visible, but internal, as if something within them was telling them to stop. And over time, those stories layered into something stronger than fear. They became respect. Because in these regions, the mountain is not seen as an object, it's seen as a presence. Not something to conquer, but something to approach carefully and leave unchanged. And that belief is reinforced not by enforcement, but by consistency. No successful climbs, no repeated attempts, no breaking of the pattern. Just the same decision, made over and over again, by people who arrive with curiosity and leave with something else entirely. And when that pattern holds for this long, across generations, across cultures, across individuals who have nothing to gain from repeating the same story, it creates a different kind of question. Not whether the legend is true, but what kind of place causes people, especially those trained to push limits, to willingly step back and accept that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Of course, not everyone accepts this explanation. And that's where the story becomes even more interesting, because from a scientific perspective, there are reasons why this mountain might feel different without requiring anything supernatural. At high altitude, the human body begins to change rapidly. Oxygen levels drop, perception shifts, fatigue sets in faster than expected, and the brain, deprived of consistent sensory input, can begin to distort time. Minutes can feel longer, or disappear entirely, depending on how the mind is processing its environment. Add to that the isolation, the symmetry of the mountain, the lack of familiar landmarks, and the psychological weight of its reputation, and suddenly, what people experience begins to make sense without needing anything beyond human biology. And that's the argument skeptics make, that the stories of accelerated aging, of hair and nails growing faster, of time behaving differently, are not evidence of the mountain itself, but of the mind reacting to extreme conditions layered with expectation. And it's a strong argument, one that explains almost everything. Almost. Because it doesn't explain why no one has ever stayed long enough at the summit to test it properly. It doesn't explain why even those who arrive without belief still report the same subtle disorientation, the same feeling that something is slightly off. And it doesn't explain why, in a world where every climbable peak has eventually been conquered, this one remains untouched, not by accident, but by choice. And that's where the story stops being about the mountain and starts becoming about something else entirely. Because whether you believe in the legends or not, whether you accept the science or not, the result is the same. People arrive at this mountain, and they don't treat it the way they treat every other place on Earth. They slow down. They become aware of their surroundings in a different way. They stop measuring progress and start noticing time itself. And maybe that's the real reason these stories exist. Not because time actually changes, but because in a place like this, stripped of distraction, stripped of noise, stripped of control, you become aware of it in a way you normally never are. And when that happens, it doesn't feel like time is moving differently. It feels like you are.